Calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Can anybody give me an amen in this joint? Welcome back to Calling All Beings. I'm super excited because guess what? We talking Bigfoot tonight, but we doing it for the free Karen Reed audience. But I tell you what, I'm stepping out the driver's seat. I'm going to get right behind the bus driver because who's finna do this is my co-host, Bia the Deal Double Gia. What's up, homegirl?
Hey, how's it going?
All right, how you doing?
Good, good. 2 days of court hearing, so it's been pretty eventful up in here.
So it's a good reason to just decompress,
Yeah.
namaste, you know what I'm saying? And we're going to talk Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And I figured the opportune thing was step out the way, let somebody who's not that familiar with the topic host the joint, and do what you got to do.
Yeah, move
Yeah.
out the way, DJ.
Yeah, get in the damn back seat. All right. So this gentleman, let me just kind of, first of all, let's just say hello to who we got. Hello, Rocker Chick. How are you? Welcome, Lulu Bell, first up in the joint. And, you know, we're talking about Julie, who is not only, she is a moderator on Dr. Simeon Hines' Bigfoot show, but she's an experiencer, has seen a Bigfoot as a child in Indiana. So she brings a lot to the C-Star. Hi, good evening. How are you? This will be great. Matt is very interesting. We're about to get to that. We are about to get to that. Orphan Methodology. How are you? Hello. Welcome. Bienvenidos. You know who I'm talking about right now from Canada. Thank you so much for the kind words that you said. I really appreciate this. Nurse Deb.
Yes.
What's up? And this is E1. What's up, Holmes? That's how I started in the Air Force, as an E1. Okay. Cheryl with an S. So welcome, everybody. Yeah, the cabbies. The host of the joint is sitting right over there. I'm going to sit back, and she's not nervous at all, man. She's just so damn good at this thing. So, no, see? Yeah, she's like, I got this, mom.
You can go take a nap, DJ.
Hey, what's up, Misty? Welcome back. Got to see you like what? She just wants to say hello. All right.
Yeah.
There you go. There's another one. Yeah, I have so much love for her. Matt, I mean, I just don't get the love here. I mean, it's the spotlight has just gone away. But anyway, all right. So let me just intro real quick before I turn it over to Bia. So this gentleman right here, I discovered hi, Standing Stones. I discovered podcast. And then we reached out to him. We became friends. I had an opportunity to interview him on Calling All Beings. And then he actually was on Calling All Beings as a guest, and he could do UFOs. He could do paranormal. You wouldn't have known that he wasn't a UFO guy when we had a PhD on. Thank you so much, Misty. There you go, Bia. How you like that? Oh, man, what you got? So anyway, So you wouldn't have known that Matt wasn't a UFO guy when he's on with like Dr. Jeff Kripal of Rice University. So he amazed us as a co-host. He's a great friend, and he is one of the best broadcasters, interviewers in the business, period. That's what I'm going to tell you about this gentleman. So without further ado, please, party people, put your damn hands together for the host of Bigfoot Crossroads, Matthew Knapp. Can I get a amen from Matt Knapp?
DJ keeping the expectations low as usual.
As usual.
For both of y'all.
Yeah.
But you know what? I just thought, Matt, I think this is a good time because you and I have spent hours and hours on the phone. We've done hours and hours of broadcasts. And I thought, let me turn it over to someone who would have questions that isn't intimate with this topic, but she's been introduced to it. She kind of, she's seen the Patty film, and then I'm just going to let her take it away. So please take it away, Bia.
All right. All right, Matt. Now that we have our names straightened out,
Yeah.
so so tell us about your background. Like, where are you from? Where you grew up?
I am a Tulsa, Oklahoma native, born and raised, never moved, always been here. I actually still live in the same house that I came to whenever I left the hospital.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. And I guess as it pertains to our conversation that's about to take place.
Yeah.
So, this house uh, had paranormal activity taking place before I was ever born. It was experienced by family members and people that would come over. And then whenever I got older, I started having experiences myself as a very young kid that would, of course, just freak me out completely. So back then, your options were library books, TV shows, but I tried to get my hands on everything I could to try and learn about what I was experiencing so it wouldn't freak me out so much. And back then, all the stuff that was kind of unexplained all got grouped together in the same books and the same sections and everything else. So by reading stuff on the paranormal, I ended up seeing stuff about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and UFOs and everything else. Fast forward to around 1998, I get my first home computer. And one night, I just type in Bigfoot into the search bar and I find all this stuff on the internet about Bigfoot. Now, whenever I say all this stuff, there's like a whopping maybe 5 websites about Bigfoot at the time. So it was fairly new in the internet world compared to what it is today. And I found out that people actually go out looking for this thing. It wasn't just, you know, focused in the Pacific Northwest. It's actually not only all over the United States, but all over the world. And it's still ongoing. And it just blew my mind. And so I actually reached out to an organization, submitted an application. That didn't really go nowhere. I was able to join the organization, but I didn't go out in the field or anything like that. It was very short lived. I was still, kind of getting my bearings in this whole Bigfoot world. And I found another group that was actually based out of Oklahoma. So I reached out to them. They had a voice chat that they did every night. Started going in there, started meeting people, started talking to people. And I realized very quickly that I was probably the youngest person in the chat. It was a lot of much older people. A lot of them were from southern states. There was a few northerners here and there, but for the most part, it was southern states. But I was actually raised by my great grandparents who were also from the South. So I was very comfortable in that environment. And I think that actually helped me out a lot to get to know them and kind of weed through some of the stuff, here and there. And eventually I was invited to meet up with them and start going out into the field. And that's kind of what led me to where I am now.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. So I know that you've done a lot of research, obviously, as you're kind of alluding to. Do you find that all this paranormal, UFO, all these unexplained things are in a particular area of the US? Or is it, I know you said it all over, but is it more concentrated in a certain area?
It seems like there's more sightings in certain areas. It seems like you have certain regions that just seem to be hotbeds for weird stuff, period. It's not just, singular to Bigfoot or paranormal or UFOs. It's everything. And then some extra things that, don't even have a category. You find these places like, the Four Corners region comes to mind just instantly. There's actually a place out kind of by the Oklahoma Panhandle that has an area kind of like that. I've heard, pretty much it's become this triangle phenomenon. Everybody wants to label something a triangle, like the Bridgewater Triangle, for instance. Obviously, this is all based on the Bermuda Triangle back in the day. But you have these regions. Another one's coming to mind, actually, as we're talking up in Pennsylvania, Chestnut Ridge area. Where, like I said, it's just years and years and years and years of unexplained phenomenon being witnessed by people, being encountered by people. And that's kind of where I'm at with my own personal journey, is trying to figure out those connections and why they seem to be all in one place at the same time.
Right. That's what I was thinking as you're saying that. I wonder why. So you have yet to figure that out then, right? It's still a mystery.
Well, I can tell you that I have figured out the common denominator, and that is people.
So do you think it's people that are more susceptible or just
That's a good question. That's one of the things that I'd like an answer to, because I'm one of those people.
right?
Like I said, I grew up in a house that had paranormal activity, but it wasn't just my house where I experienced paranormal stuff. And it didn't take me long in life to figure out that it was awfully coincidental that I just kept on encountering other people that had similar backgrounds to me and similar stories to me. And it was just these conversations with strangers would be struck up out of nowhere. And before you know it, we're both like swapping ghost stories back and forth. And I was like, okay, well, that's weird, because that doesn't come up in other situations, with other people I know. And then eventually, whenever I started doing the Bigfoot thing, it honestly wasn't that long before I had a sighting. And I'm just kind of looking around at everybody because, I'm pretty new to it at that point. I had maybe a year under my belt, and I knew that there were, absolute legends who had spent, 50 years of their lives and had never had anywhere close to a sighting, just, maybe found a possible footprint. And here I was 1 year in, and I've already had a sighting. And then the next month, another sighting. But this time I had one of my best friends with me, and more people were with me. So it was like multiple witnesses. So I knew it wasn't just me being crazy. And there really was something going on here. I had what I would call a UFO sighting whenever I was a teenager. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm going through checking off the list of all these things. As a matter of fact, the other day on Facebook, there was somebody posted a thing where it was like, how many points do you have? And it was just like a list of phenomenon you've experienced. It was like, you've heard a ghost, you've heard a ghost call your name, you've heard ghostly footsteps, you've seen a UFO, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going through the list and I'm like adding them up. And I go down to the comments and I see where somebody was like, they're posting things like 80, 75, 100. And I was at like 240. And I'm just like, okay, this isn't normal. This is not normal at all. But I've interviewed a lot of people, and I'm here to tell you the vast majority of them, after we talk about their Bigfoot sighting, and I say, so have you ever experienced like any ghosts or UFOs or anything? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. They've experienced other things.
Hey, Matt, if I can just jump in here for a second with Lulu Bell's question. She's one of our members from Massachusetts. So these are Karen Reed people that are watching right now, which is great. It's what I wanted. Is Chestnut Ridge on the Appalachian Trail, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I'm not an expert on it. I have a friend up in Pennsylvania that I've talked to about it. It was featured in a Small Town Monsters series. Mm-hmm. And if you go on YouTube and type in Chestnut Ridge and look for the Small Town Monster stuff, you'll find a great little documentary about it.
A little family. I was little. My family had a supernatural experience. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that more. Positive Pathways, and you got our damn number, so you can give us a call and tell us about it. Rocker Chick says, I wish I would see a UFO, ghost, or Bigfoot, just not too close. Absolutely. That's really the kind of thing, that really turns people, is when they, there's a difference between seeing a and you know what? Sometimes, Matt, people are seeing it through a rifle scope and get freaked out, but it's really a definite if you have a Class A in person, would you say?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's definitely a difference in reactions from person to person. And a lot of times it seems to be, for whatever reason, their own intent or purpose for being out there seems to come into play into what kind of reaction they have, which is kind of strange, but at the same time, not so strange.
Can you expound on that for the audience?
Well, I've noticed that a lot of people who have what I would call a an unpositive reaction. It's not necessarily negative, but they don't react
Scary.
well. Yeah, a lot of times it's hunters. It's a lot of people out there with a hunting mentality at the time. And by that, I mean, they don't necessarily even have to have a gun with them. But if they're out there with that mentality where they're hunting for something and putting off that kind of body language, it seems like possibly the Bigfoot respond to it in kind. And those encounters end up not being great ones.
So you think like the Bigfoot feels challenged?
Possibly. Or they just know, they can tell that, like, okay, well, this is someone out here who's being a predator. They're displaying predatory behavior. I don't want them here. I was actually talking to somebody, so I'm not, just to be straightforward with it, there's a huge dividing line between the flesh and blood believers and the paranormal believers whenever it comes to Bigfoot. I never experienced anything paranormal in regards to Bigfoot. I've only experienced what I would consider a flesh and blood creature. Now, I'm still open to the possibility. I'm not discounting or discrediting anybody's, experiences or anything like that. But I was talking to somebody just this past week about how one of the things that I find interesting is a lot of the phenomenon known as mind speak, where somebody receives a message that they believe is from the Bigfoot. It's usually a warning. It's usually get out, leave the area, do so now. And I find that pretty fascinating. If it is coming from Bigfoot, which I don't know that it is, but why is it always a warning? Why isn't it like, hey, nice to meet you? Glad you're here.
So what's the form of communication that they're receiving the message through?
Telepathically.
Okay.
Just a voice that's not theirs in their head.
Yeah.
Can you speak about infrasound real quickly too, Matt? Because that's a component of this that they'll use in certain circumstances. You could even speak to that as well.
Yeah. So infrasound is something that exists in nature. Quite a number of animals do it, and it can have adverse effects to humans. It's just basically a sound waves that are below our threshold of hearing, but they still affect us physiologically. And it is a common theory that Bigfoot has the ability to make and produce infrasound. They possibly use it for communication. They possibly use it for hunting. We don't know. But a lot of Bigfooters seem to experience the effects of infrasound if they spend enough time in the field. And I'm one of those people that has experienced effects that, it's the same symptoms as infrasound. So it could have been infrasound. It could have been EMF, which is really weird to think that you could experience EMF out in the woods whenever there's no technology around, but I guess it's possible. But I definitely felt something, and it was a very scary experience, and I never went back to that location.
That was the one where you said, I need to leave now. Right?
Yeah.
We need to get in the car.
Yeah. I made the entire group of people. There's about 10 of us out there, and I made everybody pack up and leave. And which is not what you want. Nobody wants to be the party pooper.
And there's another part of that story that's associated that I don't know that Matt wants to tell publicly, so we might have to leave that aside. But if he decides that he wants to talk about it, he will. And Rocker Chick, so they're talking UFOs as well, and Rocker Chick's sighting was quite close, but it was in Canada, and Standing Stones, I believe, is from Massachusetts. So this was hers right here. And Matt has heard a ton of these stories, and I have, and it's frightening. I mean, if you see a craft come close to your car, you are going to have a moment of ontological shock, and you're not going to pull out your iPhone. You're going to be having what we would call an oh shit moment, if it's a technical term.
Right.
And pretty much the same thing. And Matt, you probably have plenty of stories about people talking about Class A, I rounded the corner type things. And I just want to say something real quick. He was talking about intent and hunters. And I heard a narrative from a young man who was in maybe his 30s. and wheeling his younger brother, who was disabled, through the woods on a trail, you know, a hard packed trail, with a wheelchair. And they had an encounter, and the encounter was quite not scary at all. And the creature seemed to know that something, you know, that this person was an invalid, for lack of a better term, physically compromised. But Matt, go ahead and please talk about that Class A sightings. That
So this is a secondhand story. It was a recent guest I had on, a guy named Jack. He's fantastic. He's an elderly guy from Washington State, I believe, but he was actually a family member of a group of people that had a Bigfoot encounter in the 60s in Fort Bragg, California.
Yes.
The other Fort Bragg.
Yes.
And
episode.
I guess it's like it's kind of embarrassing. I had never heard of it, but I got to looking into it, and it's a really famous historical Bigfoot encounter. And this guy, it happened to his two uncles, I believe, and his aunt. And he heard the story firsthand from them. They traveled shortly afterwards up to Washington from California to tell the family about what had happened to them. And it was a really big deal. But that encounter, the aunt had gotten up in the middle of the night. There's two uncles. Her husband's one of the uncles. The other uncle is sleeping on the couch in the living room or something. She gets up for a drink of water to use the bathroom or something, and she's got a garden outside, and outside her window, she sees this big hairy thing in her garden, which she thinks is a bear. So she goes and wakes up her husband. There's a bear out in my garden, you know, shoot it. So he's fumbling around looking for his rifle, trying to find the bullets and everything. During this time, the other gentleman wakes up and he's like, "What's going on?" She said, "I saw a bear in my garden." And he's like, "Oh, I'll just go out and run it off. You know, it won't be a big deal." He goes outside, and I guess there's like a little entranceway with a screen door outside of the front door, kind of like a mud room. And so they're all gathered there, and he's gone on out to shoo off the bear. And he comes back into the house crawling on his hands and knees. And all of a sudden, this giant hair-covered Sasquatch walks up to the door, and they're like freaking out and trying to close the door and get the door shut and everything. And it kind of bends its head down. It's like 8 feet tall, and it's like looking at him, and it just kind of like looks around, turns around, walks off. No big deal. Now, over time, you know, there's a few more instances. They never had another sighting or anything like that. But what had happened was the gentleman had gone outside to shoo off this bear, and he's, you know, walking down the path in the dark, kind of looking around for this bear, and he ran right into this thing, face to chest, bumped right into it, and kind of stumbles back and looks up and sees this giant. I mean, this is early 60s. Patty hasn't happened. You know, the Bigfoot craze of the 70s hasn't happened. What is this thing? And so he just drops down, you know, trembling with fear, and starts crawling back into the house. And this thing just kind of followed him. And we were talking, and it kind of sounded like it kind of made sense. Like that reaction that the Bigfoot had, where it felt completely not threatened at all, even though this puny hairless thing had just, you know, ran right into it. And yeah, it was a very benign encounter, a very interesting encounter. But they called the sheriff, and the sheriff came out and cast tracks and everything else, and it became like this huge story for a while.
I'm sorry, Bia, I don't want to cut you off because you are the host, but I just wanted Matt to explain the Patty film, because to people here, they don't, like Dennis Dennis Sweeney's in the chat. I know he knows that film from when In Search Of, but can you please, could you please expound upon what that film is and what that film means or represents to you?
Well, that film, taken in 1967, I believe. There's a lot of people over the years that have come forward and say, "I was wearing the suit in that film. I'm the guy." This has happened at least 2 or 3 times by different people. Okay. But experts, film experts, special effects and makeup experts have all put their names on the line, spent countless hours analyzing this film from every direction. A guy by the name of William Munns, if anybody wants to look it up, he's a very well accredited special effects and makeup person, costume maker. He made the Swamp Thing costume for the original movie that was just mind blowing. I mean, he spent
79
several, he spent several years trying to figure out this film. Is this a hoax? Is this a suit? We're talking about, he looked up what fabrics were available at the time, not just who could have made it, but were the materials available? What materials were available? How much they cost? What it would have taken to pull this off? His analysis is it's not a suit. There's no way. It's impossible. There's no way it can be a suit. Nobody has ever been able to debunk this piece of footage. So it stands today as, you know, the greatest piece of Bigfoot evidence because it's never been debunked by anybody. It stands on its own merit. And for something in the Bigfoot world to last that long and hold up without being able to be proven a hoax, whenever you have one of the 2 witnesses still alive and people have interviewed him thousands of times, he's been confronted in person. I mean, it's as solid as it gets. And for some reason, it still just gets dismissed. Everybody's seen it, but whenever you bring it up, you always have 1 or 2 people that are like, oh, well, that was proven to be a hoax. Oh, well, a guy said he's the guy in the suit.
It's
never been proven.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So I do have a kind of a 2-part question. So one, I'm curious if you've ever thought, why were you chosen? And then the other part is, do you consider it a honor or like a curse?
Wow, what a great question.
She does.
I think, man, I don't like to use the word chosen because I'm not like the type of person. I hide from any sort of ego or
right,
anything like that. But I would believe that if it were a case where I was chosen, it would be to do what I'm doing now, which is interviewing other witnesses, letting them have a platform to get their stories out, and in turn allowing other witnesses to hear those stories so they all know I'm not crazy. It happened to somebody else. Somebody else has experienced this stuff. Because whenever I was a little kid looking into all this paranormal stuff, there was a long time whenever, you know, it didn't take many times of going to my little friends and telling them, yeah, I heard these footsteps come into my room last night and something sat down. You know, they start giving you weird looks and start whispering about you, and you start questioning yourself. Even at a young age, people don't understand how smart kids are and how, you know, that inner voice in their head starts running away with their thoughts. And, you know, there was a period of time where I was concerned about my own mental health, you know, like, am I hallucinating this stuff? Am I crazy? Do I need to go see a doctor? I mean, it was pretty troubling. And I have seen people go through those same types of emotions and thoughts whenever it comes to this phenomenon as well, because this thing is not supposed to exist. But for some of us, we've had no choice but to realize it's absolutely real.
So do you consider it an honor?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. But I think that is dependent on the person. I think for some people it is a curse. Absolutely. I know people personally who have lost a lot in their personal lives for the pursuit of this thing, trying to figure it out, trying to understand it, trying to have a sighting, trying to get proof of it, trying to make money off of it. So it can be a curse for sure.
Wow. Okay. So why don't you tell us about your first encounter?
Yeah. First encounter. Kind of a funny story. to me at least. So I wasn't out in the middle of a great expanse of wilderness on some old logging road or on some trail or anything like that. I was standing in a parking lot, the last place I would ever expect to see one. This was probably my second or third time I had even gone out into the field on an outing. This wasn't really supposed to be a Bigfoot outing. It was more of a group camp out and get together in an area that had known Bigfoot activity. And one of the spots was this parking lot out in front of this building that they called the Nature Center. And inside this national forest, you have these different, roads for tourists and everything. And there's this building where they have like pamphlets and brochures and stuff and a few animals on display. And you can talk to a ranger in the park during the day and everything. And it's at the trailhead for this set of trails that go back by this beautiful spring out in the middle of the woods. But at night, whenever the park's empty and the building's closed and locked up, there are sightings sometimes. People driving by the place will look over and they'll see this tall, hairy thing digging in the trash can. So that's why we were there. So we're in this parking lot. There's a group of us. We're kind of all separated. And I was told, always use the buddy system whenever we're out. Have somebody with you. So I was standing by the actual group leader at the time. And he had a night vision binocular that he was looking through at the woods. We're standing there and he's like, "Hey, Matt, come look at this." So I walk over there. He hands me the scope. I put it up to my face. I'm looking in the scope, kind of in the direction he was, and I can see his finger at the end of the scope, and he's like pointing me in the direction to look. So I'm scanning the tree line, and about 30 yards away, just inside the tree line, I see these glowing eyes. Now I'm looking through night vision, so all eyes glow. That's not a big deal. But I see these glowing eyes, so I point the binocular at them, and I'm looking, and my brain is racing, trying to compute, what am I looking at? Because I'm not looking at a deer. I'm not looking at a raccoon. I'm looking at a face. I see a face. There's these two branches, and in between the branches is a face looking right back at me. But it's a face of something I've never seen before. I was actually, right before we got on air, describing this very encounter to a very amazing artist named Sam Sharon, who's actually working on a witness forensic sketch for me of what I saw. So that's kind of crazy. But yeah, so this thing, it didn't look like an animal, but it didn't look like a human. It didn't look like drawings of Bigfoot I had seen. It didn't look like Harry and the Hendersons. Its eyes were big. They were almond shaped, kind of rounded on the outsides with the point in the middle. The bridge of the nose was more flat and scooped inward than what our bridge is. And it was thin and dropped down to like a squatty wide nose that was pretty flat. It didn't have a tip on it like ours does. The nostrils were slightly upturned. The mouth was wide. The top lip was thinner than the bottom lip. And it looked like it had an underbite. That was one of the biggest things that stood out to me. You see a lot of Bigfoot pictures, just portrayals of Bigfoot, where you have this big sort of ape-like mouth where there's a large distance between the bottom of the nose and the top lip. This did not have that. It was basically the same proportion as a human. The facial hair was very similar to just if DJ grew out his facial hair and just didn't shave. There was thinner hair on the cheeks and the upper lip, and then it got longer just as it went into a beard, just like a human does. The cheekbones were really high set on the face and very pronounced. The jaw was very wide and muscular and stuck out farther than, like, say, the temples or the side of the head. I couldn't see the chin because it was obscured by a branch. I couldn't see the top of the head to tell if it was crested or rounded or what. It had a very pronounced brow ridge that was actually kind of thicker in the middle and tapered out towards the side of the head. I didn't see any ears. But from that angle and perspective, I wouldn't have been able to see them if they were there. And the hair kind of grew from the brow ridge back up over the back of the top of the head. It kind of reminded me of the old Lon Chaney Wolfman movies, the hair pattern. I was in shock.
Yeah.
I did not know what to think. I took down the monocular, which if anybody has ever stared through night vision of any kind, as soon as you take it off your face, you just see green spots everywhere. And so I'm squinting one eye and I'm holding the other eye open, and I look at Robert. That's the guy that was with me. And I was like, is that a face? And he was like, that's what it looked like to me. And I pull the monocular back up and I look right back at it, and it's gone. Nothing's there. The gap between the two branches where the face had been was now shut. It was just the two branches, and the gap that separated the branches was gone. So what I'm thinking was happening was this thing was holding down a branch and just looking between the branches at us. And as soon as it got a chance, whenever I looked away, it just hauled ass. But I didn't hear anything. We had a little bit more activity, and whenever I say activity, we heard things, smelled things, stuff like that later on that night. But because of that sighting, I spent the next 7 years of my life going there as much as possible and spending as much of time in the area as I could. And yeah, definitely a life-changing moment.
So were you kind of looking face to face, or like was it a side view, or?
Yeah, it was looking straight at us.
Wow.
Straight at us.
And he has a total of 20 years or so of field research in total.
Jay's, you're aging me.
I'm sorry, Matt. I mean, it's important though in the context of how many investigations you've been on. And
like I said, the first time I searched for Bigfoot on the internet was 1999, 98, and that sighting happened in September of 2002.
Which is amazing. And you're not sure how many times you had been out, but it's like in the first 3. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
First 3 times actually going on a field expedition, if you want to call it that. He had his first sighting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have 3 questions from the audience, and I want to get those answered because we want to give some love and respect to the audience before we continue with our questions. So first, I'm going to have some water, and this is from Diane Hill. Hi, Diane, and welcome to our, I almost said Bigfoot Crossroads. That is Matt's show. Matt's show is pinned to the top of the chat. I believe I put his website there, but you can find all things from his podcast and his YouTube, his merch and everything. His merch is really cool. Is pinned to the top of the chat. And Matt, so here you go. You could read this one, Bia, in some sort of a Boston accent.
I don't know. I think my Boston accent just comes out. Do you think Bigfoot could be Nephilim? Nephilim Bible speaks about the book of Genesis.
Is that it? Is that what you?
Yeah, essentially what they want to know is, do you think that Bigfoot could be the Nephilim that the Bible speaks of in the book of Genesis?
Yeah. That is one of the theories.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my personal theory.
What's yours?
I think they're just some sort of relic human species that we don't know about. I think they're another type of human. And by other type, I don't mean like another race of Homo sapien, but some other type of human. Definitely more than an animal, but they can do things, in my opinion, that I don't care what size human you are, you wouldn't be able to do. If you make a human 8 feet tall, they cannot twist a tree and snap it over. These things can.
And so what Matt's talking about for the audience is them grabbing a branch that would in many cases be bigger than what your hand could grab, and they'll just take it and twist it like that.
Yeah.
And the amount of strength that it takes to do that. Some of the tree structures that they build, which are these kind of teepees and these A-frames, some of them are big enough that you would need heavy equipment to do it. You couldn't do it with a couple of humans, or you'd need equipment, and that equipment would leave marks on the ground. So you'd be able to see, oh, there was a backhoe here, and clearly they had a chain, and they would have laid, so those types of things. So we're going to get to all of these. We're going to go one by one. We're going to get to all these questions. Then we'll continue. If you would like to call in and ask Matt a question like, how do they bury their dead? Or, what do you think about all these types of things? There's the call-in number. We'll get you on Google Voice. We'll get you on with Matt.
I just real fast. Sir. I don't want to feel like I'm just dismissing that question. Mm-hmm. It's not something I talk about on my show. It's not something I talk about publicly a lot. Not because I'm ashamed or anything. It's just, I have certain beliefs about it. I am a Christian. My understanding of the Nephilim is it literally comes down to conjecture of like 2 passages in the entire Bible that speak on the Nephilim. And they are very, very vague. And there are people who have taken that and sort of ran with it and went down a rabbit hole that led them to the possibility that Bigfoot or Nephilim, because Bigfoot were, according to some translations of the Bible, these big giants, and some of them may have been hairy. So Bigfoot's big and hairy, so they must be the same thing. There's also theories that they're demons. There's also theories that they're aliens. There's also theories that they're ghosts, which, by the way, DJ, you're the one that presented that theory to me. And I've actually learned that you weren't the first. That theory's actually been out there by other people. The idea that
not that they are ghosts, but that they would have ghosts like we do. So it's possible that they could come back to their home territory and you could have an experience with one and go, oh, wow, like that.
Yeah.
Just like we have them and you've had them in your house.
Right. So there's a lot of theories out there, and Bigfoot being Nephilim from the Bible is one of those theories.
I'm going to play the role of a friend of Matt's and a friend of mine named Nathan. And I'm hesitant to play this role, but for the purposes of this question, I will. And we got into this with Scott, right? About UFOs, Scott McGinnis, is that Matt mentioned that there are people that find them, believe that they are simply that ghosts, that people that believe that they are aliens, that people believe that they're the Nephilim. So, but what we'll do when we look at the phenomenon is we will take our worldview, and if the Bible is the central book by which we live our life and we take literally every word in there, we will try to weave anything that we can explain and use that one construct. So if you're a UFO guy and you're, all you think about is UFOs and the study in Roswell and all the different Navy guys sightings and all these different things. And then you'll say, oh, well, geez, there are orbs associated in the woods that with Bigfoot sightings. So maybe they're related to aliens. So that person will say that. The very religious person might say that they're the Nephilim because of what Matt talked about, or that they're demonic. People will say that. What you have to do is kind of sort of open your mind to say, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to take what I see and take it for what it is. It kind of has human characteristics. It walks upright. Bears do not walk comfortably or naturally upright as bipeds. They're primarily quadrupeds. So anyway, just understand that when you're looking at the phenomenon, is that you have to open your mind to be open to possibilities, but don't try to, I caution you do whatever you want to do. You think whatever you want. It's First Amendment, right? But if you just try to put it within the construct of what you believe in a box that makes you feel comfortable, you may be missing it. And I shared with Bia your episode with Steve, which was so enlightening for me, Matt. I don't know how many times I've listened to that episode. I got to be getting close to a dozen now. And it's just, we really don't know anything,
Well, that's the thing. I mean, maybe even the most terrifying thing to humans is things that we don't have an answer for, that we don't understand. And we desperately take things that we don't understand and try to get an answer for them as quickly as possible. And whenever it comes to religious faith and belief, it is very comforting for us to turn to whatever our preferred religion is for the answers to these questions. And so I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do, because now we're living in a time, due primarily to the speed of communication and the ability to transmit images and video all across the world instantly, where things can't remain as hidden as they used to be. The news travels a lot faster. It can't be covered up or contained as quickly, and more voices are speaking louder than they ever have before. So we're getting glimpses of things where we have to say, it's no longer a matter of if these things exist. We now know they do exist. What are they? Are we in danger? What's going to happen? All those things that make us so nervous as a civilization. So there's a lot of people turning to their faith, turning to religion, turning to their own belief system to submit an answer that comforts them. And I think that's what you have whenever you talk about these things in regards to being Nephilim or demonic or whatever. Because even if it's a demon, even if it's something evil, at least now we know what it is. We know how to combat it. We know what to do about it. But if we don't know, if we don't have any clue, and the people that we turn to, the books that we turn to, anything that we turn to doesn't have an answer for us, that's just too scary for some people. And they don't want to live in that world.
A lot of people are just very uncomfortable in ambiguity and uncertainty and the unexplained, which is what you like to call these phenomenons. You term them the unexplained. It's perfect. Doctor, so I'm just going to, as an aside, I'm just going to present an aside here. And Matt may have been with us on one of these interviews, but on Calling All Beings, the UFO version that we've done before we started covering true crime, we interviewed Dr. Diana Pasulka. She is a PhD at UNC Charlotte. She is also a practicing Catholic as well. There's two different things. You can be a professor of religion without being a practicing in that religion, and she's a practicing Catholic. She has access to the Vatican archives herself. So that should tell you the gravitas that she has among the Catholic Church if she can access the Vatican archives. And she said, what we call angels may have been, at that time, they were seeing what we would call a gray alien today, but they didn't have a term for something that floated and looked childlike, and so they called it an angel. So there's a whole, she's done, and I think you saw that one, Bia, you saw that one on Jesse Michael's show when she was on with Colonel Carl Nell, and you had the military guy who was very bright and the religious professor with Jesse Michaels, who's another incredible interviewer, Matt. I don't know if you've heard him, American Alchemy, that guy. And she talked about that even though she's a practicing Catholic, what these people may have been seeing in their term, they had to call it an angel. They don't know what to call it. So just to open your mind to what's out there. Let's get to Lulu Bell of Massachusetts question. Matt, did you feel like what you saw was hostile?
No more hostile than if I had seen any other living creature out there, including humans. It was like seeing a stranger, seeing someone that you don't know, except it doesn't look anything like you or any other person you've seen before. But more importantly, and I can't put enough emphasis on this, it did not feel or look like an animal to me. And I am someone who was fortunate enough, like I said earlier, I was raised by my great grandparents. They were from the South, they were from the country, but we lived in the city. We had a boathouse, a fishing dock that we'd go to, and a trailer that we'd stay in. And anytime if it was the weekend or summer break or spring break or whatever, any opportunity we had, it was an hour and a half drive from our house. We were there. I spent at least 60 to 70% of my childhood up there, running around in the woods, left to my own devices, things that you should never let a little kid do. And I grew up around outdoorsmen, hunting and fishing and camping. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time in the outdoors and around wildlife. I've encountered animals whenever I was by myself. This did not feel like an animal. in any way.
And so, you could you're talking about like the people that have had that have had eye contact. They believe it's kind of like Bia, when you're looking at your dog, you have a sense when you make eye contact with your dog of the level of intelligence and intellect of that species or that you're looking at. And people that have made close eye contact with Bigfoot and they're sitting there wide-eyed, they feel like they're looking at something that there's a certain amount of intelligence. And obviously, you wouldn't be able to survive in the woods the way that they do without having that level of and avoid humans and scare away hunters when you need to and trick animals. There's all kinds of things where they would use multiple of Bigfoot to try to funnel a group of deer into a choke point so that they could attack the deer, break their necks, and have food. I mean, so there's many things like there. I want to get to this one right here. I don't know the context of this question. I guess they're a researcher. Do you know of this person, Matt?
No, it's not ringing a bell.
Okay, I am not familiar with that. Let's get to this one. I read that they smell really bad. Did you smell them, Matt?
So that night, I did smell something. We had smelled a very strong odor that the only way I could really describe it was kind of a combination of like a skunk smell and a like a barnyard animal smell. If you've ever been around a farm that had a lot of livestock, or you've been to say like a barn building at the fair around the cattle and the horses and stuff, it had that smell. Sometimes you smell it at the zoo, but it was kind of like a combination of that, except again, grew up around a lot of animals. We had a family of skunks that actually lived under our trailer when we first got it. And so I've smelled a lot of skunks, and this didn't have, like, to me, the way that my olfactory response to a skunk is, it has kind of a chemical aspect to it. And this did not have that. And it came into the area and then left the area with us standing stationary in one place. And I smelled that night. And then there was one other time I've smelled that barn animal type musky animal smell, but it didn't have the skunk smell accompanying it one other time. But other than that, that's the only times I've smelled anything that I didn't recognize that I think could have been Bigfoot.
Yeah, I do know that smell, Matt, and probably my co-host and a lot of people in the chat don't know this, but I did grow up on a dude ranch. So I was cleaning out horses' stalls in elementary school.
Yeah.
As soon as I could sort of wield a shovel and a push broom. So yeah, I know that quite well. I know that smell and spent a lot of time in the woods, which is probably why I spend a lot of times in the woods now. I don't know what this is, Matt. Do you understand what a bazajuan is? Or bazajuan?
I don't think I've heard that term before.
Positive pathways. You're going to have to enlighten us. Big shoes. I think that means Bias I'm trying to fill.
Just a quick Google. I would say yes. So without doing any research other than a quick Google search, you'll find in most cultures around the world, they have something that kind of just is described and translates to the same description as a Bigfoot, a Yeti, a Yeren, a Yowie, an Alma, like every culture, which is also strange because aliens, UFOs, ghosts, sea serpents, giant birds, and Bigfoot, dragons, and then like fairies and little things like that all seem to be universal globally. It's not just a culture specific phenomenon.
Thank you, Matt. I think we cashed out the questions here. One of Standing Stones is asking what Julie saw as a dogman, and eventually we can get to dogman, but I'm going to turn it back over to the host.
So as a follow-up question, so when we talked about the smells. So when you saw that Bigfoot disappear, Did the smell go away with it, or did it linger?
The smell wasn't at the same time as the sighting.
Oh, okay.
It had been just previous to that by about maybe 5 to 10 minutes, if I remember correctly. Again, 2002. I just know that the smell came first, the chicken and the egg scenario.
Yep.
But yeah, it was before I had the sighting.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And there is another smell that doesn't ever get talked about. You always hear about the skunky / wet dog type odor, but there's also a very overpowering sweet smell that sometimes people report smelling whenever they're extremely close to these things. And I mean extremely close. And I don't know if I'm not even going to speculate what that smell is. I don't know, but it only happens whenever you're extremely close to them.
And then I did want to ask you one more thing. So when we talk about paranormal, UFO, Bigfoot, how do you how do you think they all connect? What's the connection?
I just think it's us that connects them. At this point, I don't think they're necessarily connected. So there's a lot of talk of orbs. DJ talked about that a second ago. A lot of Bigfoot people report seeing orbs out in the woods, glowing balls of light of various sizes, various colors, different intensities. I never saw an orb. I've spoken to tons and tons of people. It's more likely that you have seen an orb than haven't if you're a Bigfooter.
Yeah.
But to me, I've never ran across. Okay, I take that back. There's been a couple of stories out there where people can put a direct connection to them. So you have to, keep it open as a possibility, but I don't see any reason to connect them. I think it's just a case of two phenomenon being in the same general geographic location. And historically, if you're a ghost hunter and you see an orb, you connect it to ghosts. If you're into UFOs and aliens, it's a UFO or some alien connected thing. If you're a Bigfooter, oh, well, it must be related to Bigfoot. So I think that's pretty much the case in all these different scenarios. I think there's a lot of spiritual paranormal activity around the world. So yeah, you might, if you're out in the woods in the middle of nowhere somewhere, you might run across a ghost. Who knows? You might see a UFO now that you're away from the city and all the, light noise is drowned out. You might run into a Bigfoot that's coming to check you out. You might run into a Bigfoot coming to check out the UFO. You might run into a Bigfoot coming to check out the ghost. If you can see a ghost, why can't they? Who knows? But I have not found anything that causes me to think any of the phenomenons are directly connected with one another. Unless you really want to go down the rabbit hole. And then you start talking about things that mimic other things and shapeshifters and things like that. If we want to talk about things like that, there is a possibility that those are responsible for some of the sightings. Maybe something out there wants to show itself as a Bigfoot because it knows your intent is to see a Bigfoot, and that's how it's going to make a connection with you. But yeah, as far as the actual phenomenon is concerned, I don't think they're connected.
Matt,
sorry.
Matt, can you tell that story real quick? And because I know you're going to like this one, Bia, and I think the audience is as well, to have an understanding of how close they can be and you don't know it. Matt, help us out with that story of the Washington. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to.
No, the Washington police officer. Remember the guy? I believe that he's maybe Native American. Remember, former Marine Corps guy. Remember, he kind of put some stuff online that you thought objectionable, but he was a police officer at like the federal level, at the local level. Do you know who I'm talking about? What's that guy's name?
Who?
Okay, the guy you kind of were like, hey, like I think he like posted some political stuff or kind of like conspiratorial stuff, but he was on Flash of Beauty. Do you know what I'm talking about? He's out in the woods filming with his dog, and they said,
yeah,
"What's his name?" Do you
I
remember his
can't
name?
remember his name.
I have his name in my phone. I just don't even remember his first name. Because remember,
I mean,
I have a phone call with a guy, but
I can relate a personal story about
sure.
being close to him.
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll relate his. But go ahead.
Yeah. So this was a time, again, it was in the same general area as my first sighting. This was years later. At this point in time, I had a research partner who actually lived in the town that's on the outskirts of this park. That's why we were there to begin with, because we knew people in the area. And he and I were going to this location known as Squatch Rock. The reason it's called that is because this national park used to be Native American land, and the Native Americans signed it over, supposedly, to the United States government to be turned into a national park. And inside this park is this area, which they've now turned into like a picnic area, but there's kind of a clearing that's a half circle shape. And going around this clearing is this rock wall about 5 feet tall. It's a natural rock formation. And on the opposite side from this wall is a creek that runs through there. The story is that the tribe used to keep horses in this area. I don't know if that's true or not, but supposedly they kept horses there, and the Bigfoot were coming up and taking the horses. And so they had to stop it. So the medicine man of the tribe did something, and the story was captured the soul of a Sasquatch inside this rock. But the truth is there's a face carved into this rock that looks like a Bigfoot face that's been carved. Nobody knows how old it is, where it came from. It's just always been there. And so we call it Squatch Rock. And because of its location by the creek, it's a good place for us to go. And you can like hear calls and things like that. So we go down there one night. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
No, we're good. Do this thing, man.
It's at sundown. And as soon as we get out of the vehicle, we hear a whoop, what we call a whoop, from the clearing at Squatch Rock, which through the woods might be maybe 50 yards from where we're at. It's not far at all, but it takes us a couple minutes to follow the trail and get there. You can't just go straight through to the woods through it. We get down there, nothing's there. But as we're going down there, we hear something running across the creek, like splashing through the water as it runs. So we immediately, once we hit the clearing and see nothing's there, we immediately go over to the creek, and you can see the disturbed silt in the bottom of the creek where something had just run through there, and it looks like it's bipedal. So we come back out and we follow the trail farther, going towards the direction that it's going. The trail goes straight across a little footbridge, and then another trail intersects with it and turns off to the left. My friend, my research partner, goes straight down the trail. I take the side trail that runs parallel to the creek, going back towards Squatch Rock on the opposite side of the creek, if all that makes sense. As I'm going, I start hearing these whistles from about, not far at all, 25 yards off to my right. I'm looking. I should be able to see things. The brush isn't too high. There's just brush and then trees, but I can't see anything. But the whistling sounds like it's coming just from the other side of the tree that's straight across from me. I walk down the trail a little more, trying to see, what is this? It's not a bird. It's not up in the tree. It's at like head level, and it's just a single tone whistle. Well, now it's coming from behind the tree a little bit farther up the trail. So I keep going, and we go like this for a little while. And then eventually that half circle that wraps around on the other side eventually comes over and kind of meets up. The woods and brush and everything meets up with the trail that I'm following. And so the clearing that I have on each side, with the creek on one side and the clearing on the other side, it's getting narrower and narrower as I go. And eventually I get to a point where I'm like, this kind of feels like I'm being lured. This kind of feels like I'm being drawn deeper into the woods away from my research partner by these whistles. I've got a bad feeling, like all of a sudden. So I'm like, nope, we don't have any flashlights. We weren't expecting this to happen. I'm going back. I'm turning around. So I go back, and as I'm coming back, my research partner is now on the opposite side of the creek, back at the clearing. He had already turned around and came back and was over there. So I'm going to go meet up with him. So I follow the trail. It intersects with the main trail. I go across the footbridge. Just on the other side of the footbridge, there's this big tree stump log laying on the ground, and this long dead grass had grown over it, and it's like kind of draped over this log. And I'm standing there looking at it. I had heard something running around over there as I was coming back up the trail, but it's dusk. It could be deer. It could be anything. I'm already kind of spooked, so I'm trying to keep a solid head on my shoulders. But I've got this walking stick because I had hurt my ankle. So I've got this big long walking stick with me, and I'm looking at the log, and I'm like, should I poke that log? And I'm like, nah, you're being paranoid. So I keep walking, go meet up with my friend. I'm telling him about the whistling and everything. He's like, and it was just over there on that trail. And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, let's go check it out. So we go back walking over there. We're walking down the main trail. It's almost too dark to see now. We get by the bridge, and I'm like, wait a second. And I'm looking, the log with the dead grass growing over it is gone. Nothing is there. It's just empty green grass. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on? So I start thinking, and I'm like, the only thing that I know this is a reach, but could that have been a Bigfoot laying there? And the dead grass that I was looking at was its hair. And because it was dark and because it was laying so like, did I almost just poke a Bigfoot with a stick? Because I was right next to this thing, and now it's just gone, and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, yep, we're leaving. We're
the
living
log didn't disappear on its own.
Yeah. That log just wandered off. So I don't know that it's a Bigfoot. I can't prove that it's a Bigfoot, but in my heart of hearts, I believe it was. And I was standing like 3 feet from this thing, and it did not flinch. It did not move at all, whatever it was.
And I think I got to send. Are you done? I'm mad. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, I'm good.
There's so many stories out there. It's like we're trying to give the audience. I'm going to send via the Scott Gearin footprints outside his Minnesota home. He borders a state forest in Minnesota. And I don't know if I've sent you these tracks, but there is absolutely nothing around these tracks, and they're like 6 feet apart. So there's so many stories like that. That is a freaky encounter where you're like, did you run back to the car at that point, Matt?
Yeah. That's one of like a couple times it's just like, okay, this is too much. This is just too much. I don't know what to do with this.
How close you are. It was Rich Germeau. Do you remember Rich Germeau?
Yep.
Okay. So we just couldn't think of his name. So I posted it in the chat. He was in A Flash of Beauty. There is his interview there. And then they did outtakes where they gave you like an hour or 2 hours of Rich Germeau, even though maybe 10 minutes made it into the movie itself, right? Rich, and Matt, I want you to stop me if I say anything that's incorrect in the story or something. Just raise the BS flag. Rich was a police officer in the Marine Corps. Rich was a federal police officer. Rich has been a police officer in like the county level and even the town level. And at one point, Rich was a town cop in Washington, in the area, I think not far from where he grew up. And he was going down a road. And I know you guys can imagine that there are these areas where you could park off to the side of the road and just go down like a little incline, and there'll be like a beach area to a lake. And so people will go congregate in those areas to get a summertime swim when it's really hot. But if you were to look from your car, you can see these little beach areas and all these people swimming and the whole 9 yards, and the blankets and towels and stuff. And didn't sound like it was that big of a swimming hole, but that there were a slew of people there. Rich saw a Bigfoot walking back from looking at the bathers back across the road and into the woods, and not one of these people knew that it was there. Do you remember that narrative, Matt? And he was just like, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that happens a lot. That just happens a lot. Because one, they don't exist. So why would I look for one? You know, and if you're at the beach or whatever, and you're in a crowd of people and you're paying attention to other things, and there's a person standing up there, and I don't even notice them. They walk off, it's just a person. That's what stands on two legs and is shaped like a human, a person. Oh, it's a guy with long hair. Oh, it's a guy wearing, how many times have you heard? Yeah, they were wearing like a snowsuit with a hood. It was all the same color. Like, yeah. Or it was a Bigfoot covered in hair. Yeah. Countless times, countless stories about them looking in windows at people at their homes, kitchen windows especially. And if you think about it, at least all my experiences, kitchen windows are usually higher up off the ground. They're usually like a half window above the sink, for instance. And so if you're on the outside of a home and you're 8 feet tall, it's going to be easier to look through the kitchen window than it is the other windows. The kitchen window usually isn't occupied by a person or inside of, a person's view. A lot of smells might be coming from the kitchen window that might attract these things, but for some reason, it always seems to be the kitchen window. I've just tried to figure out the answer to that. That's why I'm rattling off all those things, because for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why is it always the kitchen window? It's always the kitchen window. But yeah, people will look over and see this big hairy thing with a face staring at them through the window. It blows my mind that something that is so elusive and has stayed hidden from being proven for this long will just come up to somebody's house and look through the window, come up to the house and slap the side of it to see if you'll run outside or not and look for it, push on the back of a car that's parked on a road with people inside of it. You hear all these crazy things, but you hear them time and time and time again. There was a police officer here in Oklahoma who had, pulled off in one of those little gravel pull-offs to catch speeders or whatever. And he's sitting there in his parked car backed up to the woods, and something comes out and pushes it into the road while it's turned off in park. He knew what it was. He didn't look to see. He turned his car on and just hauled ass. Didn't even bother with it.
Nothing else could do that.
Yeah. And you hear a lot of these stories from law enforcement, park rangers, park officials, things like that around these smaller communities that just never make it to the internet.
So do you think it's because they're just as curious about us as we are about them? Or that we're trying to find an explanation like we would be trying to solve?
I think we are their entertainment. I think a lot of the younger ones are curious about us because a lot of these more interactive encounters like that you hear about, the stature of the creature whenever they are seen is smaller, more typical human size. And a lot of the behavior seems more what we would consider like a human teenager behaving, kind of pushing its limits, seeing what it can get away with, messing, rock throwing, things like that, where the bigger ones seem to be a lot more aloof and standoffish and don't want to have anything to do with us.
Matt, could you react to Rocker Chick's question here? And I'll read it. Almost everyone that I bring this topic up to look at me like I'm insane, LOL. So I rarely talk about this belief, and it is refreshing to know that other people also believe that they exist. Could you give a 360 degree on this one?
Well, I mean, you're not crazy. You're not insane. This was something that, although I was very interested in, and although I grew up, like I said, in a house that had stuff going on that I couldn't explain, I went out there to see if it was real or not. I went out there to see what the hell is going on. I've met these people. I've got to know them. They remind me, like I said, of my grandparents. Very trustworthy people, very down to earth people, different backgrounds. And they're telling me about these crazy experiences. They're telling me that these things are real. Well, I don't know about that. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to find out for myself. And that's what I did. And I found out very quickly that these things do exist. There's a lot of people that have experienced it. There's a lot of people who have seen these things. There's a lot of people who have had encounters. There's people going through it right now. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, society's not wanting to just take anybody's word for it. They, everybody demands proof, and this isn't something, everybody wants to talk about what's it going to take? Is it going to take a body? Yada, yada. I don't even know, because this isn't something that anybody cares about proving. It does not benefit anybody to prove that it's real. They don't have to do anything to cover it up because there's no proof. You're not going to shoot one. Nobody's been able to do it yet. And trust me, people have tried for a very long time. These things are a lot more clever than people give them credit for. And we're not nearly as clever as we like to think we are. So, and it's just one of those scenarios where I would suggest looking for and reaching out to other like-minded people that have experienced these things and do know they exist, and spend your time talking to them instead of the assholes that are just going to make fun of you and go about their day.
There was an organization in Oklahoma that we will not name here for reasons that they're over a decade now, right, Matt?
Oh, yeah.
And their stated goal, they had some sophisticated weaponry. They had an encampment where they were having regular contact, and their goal was, we're going to shoot one, we're going to kill one, and we're going to bring the body in for science. And they have not going out there. They don't spend days out there, right, Matt? They spend months at a time out there.
Yeah. They have sightings.
They have sightings, and they have not been able to shoot one.
In my opinion, they do amazing research work. From a scientific standpoint. They do excellent documentation. They have some of the best minds in the field working on it, and they have not been able to bring in a body. So there you have it.
You talked about a lot of people have sightings, so I thought, and BF, you'll give me this, I thought it would be an appropriate moment to talk about this organization that's streaming across the bottom, and will stream the BFRO. And the reason I ask you this, Matt, is so you can give the audience a sense of how much data that we're talking about here, that there is in terms of sightings. So could you talk about Scott Tompkins' site, fellow New Yorker, GIS specialist, major, graduate, and Bigfoot mapping project?
Yeah, so he has done something excellent that was long overdue. You have the BFRO, which has always been the go-to place to submit a sighting report on the internet. There's a few other resources out there that have collected reports over the years. A lot of researchers and investigators have spent a lot of time collecting reports. And the Bigfoot Mapping Project have taken those reports and mapped them geographically and have started using statistical data to look for patterns. And like I said, that's something that's been long overdue. He's actually found a pattern that I found myself, which was pretty interesting to, it's kind of like being peer reviewed, seeing somebody else find the same pattern that you found. It makes you feel good. But yeah, thousands of reports. I guess the number of reports that make it to the internet are less than 10% of the actual sightings that happen. And in any given year, there's a few thousand reports that come in that people don't even know about, that don't even make it to websites. So whenever you take that into consideration, statistically, You know, you're looking at maybe 10,000 encounters a year happening, and has been happening for the past however many years, 30 to 50 years. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. If anything, it's speeding up.
Can you add to this organization that's been around much longer? Scott has only been out for, I mean, a year or something, but he's got a lot of data. But could you talk about this one?
Yeah, the BFRO. Obviously, most people are familiar with the BFRO from the TV series Finding Bigfoot. They are the organization that I first found that I submitted my application. Julie, that is correct. The BFRO historically edits woo. Anything paranormal, non-flesh and blood was edited out of reports. Back in the day, I don't think they're doing that any longer. But that was the rumor. So it kind of skews the data. You don't get a lot of paranormal reports, just to be honest. The majority of paranormal talk happens on the internet, within groups that are already of that mindset. Whenever you're out in the field taking reports and talking to the people face to face and visiting the properties and things like that, you don't really run across it for whatever reason. And this is situations where, like, there are people that I've investigated their property. I've stayed on their property for weeks at a time. I've known them very well. I broke bread at their tables. I've stayed in their homes, and they still, even if they had paranormal stuff happening, there was no speak of them being, you know, into the woo or anything like that. It was just always, this is what's happening. And it's either happening or it's not happening. So, you know, it's hard enough to catalog data and research and everything about these things because they're so elusive. And then whenever you add further elements of the paranormal into it, those things are just impossible to quantify. So I don't know that it ever will be.
I just wanted to throw this in there from Diane Hill. Matt, you've probably heard of this one. I believe, I don't know if it's U.S. Army Rangers that made this report.
Yeah, it was a podcast episode a few times.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, there's been an Afghanistan sighting talking about when we were at war and we had ground troops there, and they had a sighting that freaked them out. And they're quite
so like, I'm not saying this applies to that story. I will say that over the years, there have been a lot of stories, and a lot of those stories have picked up their own life and kind of become historical. There's one story in particular that relates directly to my home state of Oklahoma about the war. I believe it was General LaFleur was his name. There's a county named after him where there's this war between the Native Americans and these giants. It never happened. I know the author of the story that made up the story. My research partner was one of the characters in the story that he wrote, and it was posted online years and years ago. And now it's presented all over the internet as this historical story that actually took place to support, you know, the existence of Bigfoot, but it's in fact fiction. And that does happen, unfortunately. A lot of stuff has muddied the waters of Bigfoot research.
Matt has debunked. There are many things that I have seen and heard, and Matt will debunk a lot of things that are out there that are, and World Bigfoot Central. Hi, welcome. Glad to have you here. Saying LaFleur incident, same conclusion I came to. Thanks, Matt. But he's telling you a lot. You don't want to throw out all the wheat when you're getting rid of the chaff, and there are tens of thousands to report. It only takes one to be right, and the Patty film was that one that, you know, if you listen to Dr. Jeff Meldrum of Idaho State, it's indisputable. But there, all these tens of thousands of people, including the gentleman who we have on the show right now, the host of Bigfoot Crossroads, can't everybody be lying?
Including Duke.
Including Duke. Okay, there you
World
go.
Bigfoot Central. He had his own sighting. I talked to him years ago on a former podcast I was a part of. And yeah, you run into a lot of people. I ran into a gentleman. I was at a hospital actually getting some tests ran. I was filling out the information in the waiting room, and I was wearing a Bigfoot t-shirt. And this gentleman came up to me, an older guy, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "I like your shirt." I looked at him and I said, "Oh, thanks." And kind of went back to what I was doing. I mean, I'm there to get medical tests. It's not a fun time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he starts to walk out and he hesitates and he turns back around and he comes back and he looks at me. He kind of looks around. He looks up at my wife and he looks back down and he says, "You know, I shot one when I was 12. And I'm just like, "Okay, well, now you have my attention." And I'm like, "What was that?" He said, "Yeah, whenever I was 12 years old, I was over at my friend." And this old man proceeds to tell me this story. It was probably one of the most impactful things that's happened to me since I ever started this whole thing.
Wow.
He's got tears welling up in his eyes. He has no reason to, there's no way he's lying to me. He didn't make this up on the spot. There's no reason for him to stop and telling me the story. And you could tell he's just unpacking it. And oh, he's unpacking it. So much emotion. And he tells me the story about whenever he was 12 years old and he's staying over at his friend's house and his friend's dad is a sheriff and he's gone to work and they're home alone and the horses are raising a ruckus out back and they go out to the back screen porch and open the door and there's this old light on the side of the barn out there and the kid's dad kept a rifle. I think he said it was a 22 there by the back door, just a varmint gun to run things off. And they grabbed it whenever they stepped out back. And he said this big hairy thing was standing back there by the barn. He said it was completely in the light, completely silhouetted by the barn. He just pulled up the rifle and shot just out of straight fear. This thing yelled out, this blood curdling howl and took off running. They run back inside. They don't go after it. They run back inside. They're freaking out. The kid's dad comes home. They tell him what just happened. He goes out, he finds the blood trail. He calls for backup. He gets the other sheriff out there. They follow this blood trail. They track it all the way to the neighbor's house. The neighbor says, "Well, this thing came running by my house earlier. I didn't get a good look at it. It was dark or anything, but it ran right through my yard." They followed the blood trail for a little bit farther, lost track of it. That was that. That was the entire story. But to this guy, it was a lifetime, years of holding that in. And I know he just felt relief, just that one chance encounter that I had. And as soon as he walked out, I mean, like he was at the verge of crying. And as soon as he walked off, I mean, there was other particulars, I asked him where it was. He told me the exact location, not too far from where I live and everything. And he leaves. And I'm just like in awe. And then it kind of dawns on me and I like look over at my wife sitting next to me and she was like, "Well, why didn't you get his name for your podcast?" I'm just like, oh shit, I've got a podcast. I didn't even think about that because I was just so much in the moment of making that connection with another person who has seen one of these things. And then to hear a story like that. And it was just, so pure. As cliche as it sounds, it was just a pure moment. And those are the reasons that I do the podcast. And I'm still doing this all these years later.
And at one point you were on the biggest show there was, Bigfoot Outlaws, at the time.
Yeah, at the time.
Was kind of a closed club, and probably a lot of people didn't think that they would take on a third party, but they did. Bear and Kumbo, and they're both from Alabama.
Kumbo's originally from Alabama, and Bear's originally from Mississippi.
Okay, yeah, it was pretty similar. As a couple of quick hitters, I would like you to tackle these because we're really out of time at this point. But I wanted, before we go and promo Bigfoot Crossroads, I would like it if you could give me some quick lightning round. Give me Burying Their Dead, and then I've got one more for you. Oh no, do they bury their? What do they do with their dead? Your opinion? Maybe.
Yeah, we don't
know. Your opinion.
I think they bury them. I think they have reverence for the dead. I've heard some stories where they've had reverence for the dead of other people, and animals of people. I know a lady whose dog got hit by a car that had Bigfoot coming up to her property and everything, and there was some very mournful vocalizations made around her property the night that she buried her little dog over there by the tree line. There's a story, a Native American woman on the reservation who was reportedly feeding these things, which I do not suggest anybody do, but some people do. Them. Yeah, some people do it. This lady was feeding them, and she passed away, and her house sat empty, and supposedly these things would be heard coming up around the house, still yelling and stuff, grieving that she was gone for whatever reason. So I believe that they have a respect for the dead, and we haven't found a body, so they got to go somewhere with them. So yeah, I've heard a few more stories about some possible grave sites. You hear rumors every now and then, maybe a couple times every 10 years or so, about somebody shooting one and burying one, and I know where the body is and that sort of thing. But I'm talking about actual burial sites that belong to something that a human didn't make. And there's also historically been situations where reportedly giant skeletons were found in Native American burial mounds right along with the Native Americans. And you hear those kind of things and kind of have to scratch your head. What's going on?
At this point in their evolution, it would be inconsistent with what we know about even the evolution of primates, because they say that even the bonobos at this point are starting to use tools. There's that one of them fishing off of a limb hanging over with some sort of a spear set up hanging over like a creek or a brook. And so it's inconsistent with what their evolution would have to be that they wouldn't have tools.
Right.
Would you react to that?
Yeah. I'm sure everybody that's looked into the Bigfoot phenomenon has heard of the Sierra Sounds.
But these people would not have.
Right. So the belief, a lot of people I've heard talking out in the woods that was not human. I did not see a Bigfoot talking. All I can tell you is that I heard a language being spoken that I could not recognize in an area that did not have any humans. I 1000% verified that there were no humans over there. This is something that's been reported numerous times of people hearing these things talking. I just interviewed a guy, the episode comes out Friday, where he heard these things talking in his sighting. He saw them communicating back and forth with his own two eyes. The Sierra Sounds are these recordings that were recorded a long time ago of something talking. They said it was Bigfoot. Scott R. Nelson, who's a cryptolinguist, former cryptolinguist, is one of the many scholars and experts who have analyzed this audio and said, yes, it is a language. No, it's not human. So if we're at the point of we can accept that Bigfoot is real and we can accept that Bigfoot has a language, we know from our own civilization and from other civilizations that we've studied through primates and things like that, that if you reach the point of language, there's other steps that you've already reached before you get there. So tools would have already have happened far before language.
Yes.
Yeah.
Digging. You know, like a kid will like take a stick and dig in the woods.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's a very, very young kid, you know, like
rock throwing is something that gets reported constantly. I've experienced rock throwing. It's weird to see rocks coming flying out of the woods. It's just not something you run into. I dare question, have you ever had rocks thrown at you from the woods before? Probably not. It's weird that you happen to go in areas looking for Bigfoot and in areas where Bigfoot is seen, and all of a sudden rocks are a thing that comes flying through the woods at night. It's the only time I've experienced it. But throwing a rock is a form of tool usage. It is at that point a tool on a most basic level, but it is still tool usage.
How many animals do you know in North America that have a physiological hand with an opposable thumb that could throw a rock?
A raccoon has the ability to grasp a small pebble with its hand. A raccoon's hands are very similar to ours. It does not have the correct shoulders or manual dexterity to throw the rock.
There you go. And especially at the height and velocity that these things are seen coming through the trees.
A bear can swipe a rock. But we don't have a lot of bears in Oklahoma. and these rocks were not being swiped up by a bear from 10 feet away. They were flying through the air, over our heads and into a creek behind us. Except for the one that literally hit the hood of the car that I was leaned up against, bounced up, hit me in the stomach, and landed back on the car. At that point, I could no longer deny that something was throwing rocks, no matter how bad I wanted to. And the next night, I was trying to figure out the whole rock throwing thing and trying to wrap my head around it, and that's when I had my sighting.
Lulu Bell's question.
I believe they are from here. I believe they've been here for a long, long time before we were here. Again, all those different cultures that I talked about that have something like Bigfoot in their history, Native Americans especially, all have stories about the Bigfoot being here before them. Mm-hmm. And if anything, I would say if something is on this planet that wasn't from this planet, it would actually be us. I think the Bigfoot make more sense whenever you look at nature and everything else on this planet, and we're the ones that stands out as something weird.
That's a good point, because they can live off the land without having to have heating and all that neat stuff. That's a really good point. And I mean, so the scrawling on the cave walls, so there are certain Native American tribes where you'll see them scribe themselves, and you can see headdresses and sort of the clothing that they wear, and then they'll be talking to a much larger creature is what they'll scrawl, and it's quite obvious what they've drawn.
Yeah, there's actually this famous one called the Hairy Man. That is a rock drawing of what many people believe is a Bigfoot. It's actually kind of recently come under fire and up for debate that I won't get into. But yeah, there are cave drawings that look like Sasquatch to me. There's cave drawings of giant human looking footprints, which is kind of weird. But the stuff's out there. You just have to research it and look for it.
Yeah, there's so much. We're gonna have you back for a second one, Matt, because there's more stuff. Let's let the host get a last question or whatever if she has one.
Well, I mean, I feel like every time I hear you talking, I think of another question in my head. So your last statement, I'm thinking, well, is there less? Because I mean, obviously, in order to create more Bigfoots, so that means that their population is because you were saying we're the ones that don't belong, but I feel like their population is so much smaller. So are they not mating, or are they? Or any thoughts on that?
Well, you dirty little hamster. That's what you want to know about?
No, I'm just curious. Like,
no, it's a great question. It's a great question.
It's a great question. But
so let me preface this by saying that, like, yes, of course, DJ got sound pads. Here we go.
That one's actually on StreamYard. I recorded it and put it on there, but go ahead.
Everything I've said and everything that I've talked about, I've been thinking about this stuff for over 20 years now. Okay. Nobody knows anything.
Right.
Nobody knows. I can tell you that these things do exist. I don't ask you to accept that. I can't prove it. But for me personally, I do know that they exist. I know that at least some of the time they walk on two legs. They're pretty much shaped like a human. They're covered in hair. And typically they're larger than we are. Other than that, it's all conjecture and theory and opinion and everything else. But are they mating? Yes. People do see infants and juveniles and little ones, males and females. The Patterson film, if that is a real Bigfoot, definitely has female properties to it. I have personally cast footprints that were 5 inches long and about 2.5, 3 inches wide, right next to tracks that were 14 inches long and 5 inches wide. So there's definitely babies. So how is this happening? Because their numbers are too small and things happen. My answer is that there's a lot more of them out there than you realize. Not a lot, but enough for sure. Just in the single park area that I did my research in, where I had my first sighting, we believed at the time that there was 3 groups of them. This would have been within about a 20-mile radius of one another, which is unheard of. It's weird for that many to be in that small of a location. But we guesstimated that there was around a total of 20 of them in that area, if you added the 3 groups together. In the state, I mean, several hundred to 1,000 at least per state. I know that there are people out there who are probably a lot smarter than me that, guesstimate the numbers around 3,000. I think that number is drastically off. Whenever you start crunching the numbers and doing the math, there's a lot more than that.
Is that Dr. Meldrum using the black bear population as a?
It might be
a barometer.
It might be. Yeah.
I want to say this to Patty Murphy. There are many shows dedicated to cryptids in North. Oh, do you mean you'd love to do a show? Because I don't know if you would. That's awesome. There are many shows dedicated to cryptids. We could have that like for a part 2, because we haven't talked about Dogman. There's a lot more Bigfoot even to talk about with Matt. So we'll do a part 2 and we'll get into that. And Duke, right here, what Duke is trying to tell you is if they are trying to hit you with a rock, they will hit you with a rock, meaning their accuracy is baseball pitcher-esque, Sandy Koufax-esque. Now, what is he talking about there? There are people who will be walking up a trail in a direction that the Bigfoots don't want them to go. That mean that their young is there. That may mean that their female is there. And by the way, Patty, what Matt was alluding to, and Biasaw is Patty does have mammary glands. And nobody in 1967, in October of 67, would have created a suit to scare people that had mammary glands. It just defies any sort of logic, or as one of our friends says, it defies credulity. So what they'll typically do, you'll be walking up a trail and they'll throw rocks that will land right in front of your feet without fail. You're walking, a rock hits, but it doesn't hit you, but it hits right in front of you. And that'll basically continue until they have to ratchet it up if they're really trying to scare you away. And that's when they may do a howl, and the Bigfoot howl is said to vibrate every part of your body from the inside out. And that's when usually people will turn around and say, okay, I think it's time to go to the car now. So, Matt, any comment on that before we start to close?
Yeah, I was talking to a couple of guys. They're lifelong friends. They're both doctors, and they're both into Bigfoot. And they had gone out researching in an area, found some really interesting stuff. And the morning that they were leaving camp, I think they had just cooked some breakfast or something on the camp stove, and they were standing there talking, and a pine cone hits the ground. And one of them kind of like looks up in the air. There's pine trees around. They're in the woods, but the time of year's wrong. There's not a lot of pine cones on the ground. And this was a green pine cone. A few seconds later, another one comes. And over the course of 30 minutes, I can't remember how many they said was thrown towards them. They saw them flying through the air, but they would look. There's kind of like this overlook area next to their camp that they were coming from that direction, but they couldn't see up on top of it. But these pine cones, these green pine cones, were being thrown from there and landing between their feet and between them. And they were standing next to one another. Never got hit. So that's pretty amazing to be able to throw with that kind of accuracy. A green pine cone, not even a baseball or anything. It'd be hard enough with a baseball to do that, but yeah.
Right, but a pine cone is obviously oblong, and it'll tumble through the air.
Yeah,
So
and I also had a friend that was sitting around a campfire. They were on a Bigfoot outing. I wasn't at this one. It was in Alabama, I believe. And she was sitting at the campfire, and they had a couple rocks thrown, and they were kind of being messed with. They could hear something running around. They were actually on the high ground, and the ground dropped off dramatically and then went out to like a river system, I think. And the rocks were coming from down below them. And then all of a sudden, they heard this rock zinging through the air, and it hit the tree behind her chair directly above her head. And that was whenever they decided to go ahead and pack up. And she showed me the rock. She took it home with her.
There's so many of these narratives. It would blow your mind, things that we've heard that and Matt has heard many, many more than I. And like he said, he has spent days and weeks at people's properties investigating sightings and all sorts of things. So, Matt, let me turn it over to the host before we close and say goodbye to you.
Yes. Thank you, Matt. I think definitely have a new perspective after talking to you. And I think you're so well spoken. I love listening to you. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, wow. Thanks. I enjoyed it. DJ actually told me that this was going to be a bunch of questions from people that didn't know anything about Bigfoot. And I have to say, I was not prepared for a lot of these questions coming in. You did not ask questions of a person that knows nothing about Bigfoot. You did a fantastic job, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes. I think it's my analytical mind. I want to know the whys.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, World Bigfoot Central at Duke. Yeah, if that's the name of I'm assuming that's the name of your YouTube. So if you guys want to find out more about this, you obviously have Matt's Bigfoot Crossroads, which you can see, and that'll be in the show notes for the podcast. I'll also throw it in the YouTube notes, and his website is pinned to the top of the chat as well. So yeah, and it'll be in the podcast show notes. So. And also World Bigfoot Central. Thank you for coming and hanging out, Duke. Appreciate you. And Matt, it's been an honor speaking with you again. I hope you'll come back and we can do another one. And maybe we're going to get, for the next one, we'll get some more Karen Reed content creators, get maybe 2 more to come on to kind of throw questions at you. And you'll kind of like, it'll be like you're in the interview setting there. You know what I mean? You're in the chair.
Dunk tank?
Huh?
The dunk tank?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I enjoy it. I enjoy it because like I understand the perspective. So I like to talk to people about it that are willing to listen, of course. It's hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow, that it's always been, Harry and the Hendersons or, whatever on TV and kind of like, oh yeah, that's, good old American folklore. And, but yeah, there's a lot more to it.
It's not folklore.
It is not folklore.
It is not
for
folklore.
Sure.
So, thank you very much, brother. I hope to speak with you soon. And on behalf of our mod Julie and Miss Jessica and Beezy, who's in the chat. There's Duke right there. And then Matt is pinned to the top of the chat. That's BigfootCrossroads.com, and that's where you can find everything Matt, his YouTube, his podcast, including his merch. And thank you, Bia, for hosting this thing. And peace out. One love. And we'll see you down the road. We never know what is up around the bend.